Hi, I'm David DiCerto from Castletown Media, and I'll be taking a look at Mufasa, the Lion King, through a Catholic lens. There's a scene in 1994's original The Lion King in which young Simba steps into his father Mufasa's massive paw print and realizes he has some big shoes to fill. It's an image and a challenge that came to mind when thinking about expectations for this movie. Together with 1989's The Little Mermaid, 91's Beauty and the Beast, and 92's Aladdin, The Lion King helped define what has come to be known as the Disney Renaissance era. Its roaring success led to a smash hit stage production, the highest grossing Broadway musical of all time, and a franchise of movies including a photorealistic CGI remake in 2019. And now, this film, directed by Barry Jenkins. The original movie has always held a special place in my heart, at least among Disney films of a more recent vintage. Beauty and the Beast may be the Renaissance era's gold standard, but there's just something about The Lion King from its opening Serengeti sunrise that has stuck with me over the years, even more so after becoming a father. Because, at its heart, it's a film about fatherhood. In my book, as far as greatest on-screen dads go, Mufasa, at least in the original, ranks right up there with Marlin from Finding Nemo.
Nemo, don't move! Don't move! You'll never get out of there yourself. I'll do it.
And Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird.
You can see the necessity of going to school. We'll keep right on reading the same every night.
And it's as a dad that I went into the screening of Mufasa, with trepidation. The original meant, and still means, a lot to me. So I was really rooting for this one. But I also had this uneasy feeling in my gut that I'd walk out disappointed. And, as is usually the case, my gut was right. Well, at least if you're thinking about taking your pride to the multiplex, it's pretty much family-friendly apart from some scenes of peril that may be upsetting to young, sensitive cubs. And there's also a plotline involving a menacing pride of invading white lions known as the Outsiders, ostracized for being born different. But as they're the bad guys, it's hard to read any, well, pride agenda into it. And if the film's trying to make a statement, it's a subtle one. Okay, so before sinking our claws into other themes and messages, some good and some not, I'll give you a quick synopsis. As the title suggests, it's an origin story of Mufasa, the OG Lion King. It opens with Simba, voiced by Donald Glover, all grown up and reigning over the Pride Lands and ready to be a proud papa for a second time. Before heading off to be with expectant Queen Nala, voiced by Beyoncé, he drops his firstborn, Kiara, off with Meerkat Timon and Warthog Pumbaa, voiced by Billy Eichner and Seth Rogen, and wise mandrill Rafiki, John Connie. And they wait out a storm by telling their young ward the story of how Grandpa came to Pride Rock and assumed the throne. Wait, what? Came to Pride Rock? Now, if you're like me, and you remember that beautiful scene in the original between father and son where Mufasa tells young Simba all that heartfelt stuff about the great kings of the past looking down at them from above, you might be, as I was, a tad confused. I mean, I assumed those great kings were their forebears, that Mufasa was a king because his father had been a king, as had his before him, and so on, creating a lineage of great kings in the circle of life. Well, I assumed wrong. Mufasa, it turns out, has no royal blood in him. He's actually a commoner from a wandering family of lions, and, being in a Disney film, there's a good chance that, well, things won't end up well for his parents. As fate would have it, an orphaned Mufasa winds up being rescued by a lion cub from a different pride named Taka, who grows up to be none other than Scar. They become fast friends, brothers even, though Taka's father, King Obasi, voiced by Lenny James, shuns the foundling and banishes him to stay with the lionesses, away from him and the other males. Now, you probably think I'm going to go all negative, but Hakuna Matata, I want to start by pointing out some things that the filmmakers can take pride in. Pun intended. First, the film actually says some affirmative things about family, like calling children a blessing. And though it lasts about one musical number, the depiction of Mufasa's loving, intact family with a mom and a dad is a rarity and a victory these days in pop culture. I'll take my wins where I can get them. There's also a recurring, slightly spiritual theme involving Mufasa's journey towards the light, represented by a mythical promised land beyond the horizon, Malele, Swahili for forever. And while in the story it winds up being a real place, the eventual Pride Lands, it also connotes a desire for a heavenly home. At least that's how I took it. Visually, I prefer the more traditional Disney animation of the original, but the photorealistic CGI is remarkable in its lifelike rendering of both large-scale action sequences, a raging river flood, or an elephant stampede, and the slightest of details. Snowflakes on Rafiki's fur. Multiple critics have pointed out how the photorealism results in the film feeling a bit cold, an observation which I don't completely agree or disagree with. In reviewing Moana 2, I lamented how that soundtrack didn't quite hit the lyrical heights of the original Moana by Lin-Manuel Miranda. Ironically, Miranda did pen the songs here, but they feel much less inspired than those from the 1994 movie by the powerhouse songwriting team of Elton John and Tim Rice. Thankfully, the new film manages to weave in the traditional African vocals of Levo M and the rousing pride rock theme of Hans Zimmer's award-winning score, though composer Dave Metzger has replaced Zimmer this time around. Another really nice touch is that the film is dedicated to the late, great James Earl Jones, who died before this film was released, and whose incomparable voice imbued Mufasa in the original and the remake with such regal majesty. Jones, a convert to Catholicism, has the distinction of being the voice of both one of the best cinematic fathers of all time and one of the worst.
I am your father.
So I was glad to see proper tribute given. I only wish it could have been a better film to honor his memory. One could almost say Jones was the soul of The Lion King, that he gave it its gravitas and grandeur. What this film does, unintentionally and perhaps with the best intentions, or not, is to undermine or at least undo much of that soulfulness and timelessness in favor of a more contemporary vibe. In rewinding the clock, the film doesn't so much just fill in dramatic blanks about the pride's past, what caused the brothers falling out, and just how did Scar get that scar, but instead pretty much blows up the franchise's underlying foundational mythology by retconning key elements of the original film. As Rafiki says in the film, the eye never forgets what the heart has seen, and the original film had touched many hearts. I can't cover everything, but I'll try to distill my problem with the film down to just two words: fatherhood and tradition. Now, as I said, The Lion King was essentially a story about fathers and sons. In our postmodern Western culture where fatherhood and masculinity in general is devalued, derided, and at times even demonized as toxic, the 1994 film offered a needed view of authentic manliness that was strong and noble, inspirational and aspirational. Mufasa, in many ways, was a Christian ideal of what a man should be: strong yet sensitive, brave but not reckless, loving and loyal, selfless, just, and merciful. Remember that last one. We'll get to that later. In a word, he was virtuous. Sure, he was a stern disciplinarian when necessary, but he could also be playful, gentle, and yes, as when in danger of losing his son, even afraid. But Mufasa didn't just embody these traits, he modeled them and constantly tried to pass them on to his son Simba, the future Lion King. As any good father does, he prioritized both his role as protector and teacher, instructing his son how to be a man, a lion, but an honorable one. But from whom did Mufasa learn these life lessons? Again, anyone who saw the original would naturally assume from his father, one of those great kings he spoke of. Now, in fairness, Mufasa's father in this film, in his brief screen time, does exhibit heroic, self-sacrificial courage. But for the lion's share of the film, Mufasa learns about what it means to be a man, or, well, a manly lion, from, well, his adopted mom, the maternal Eshe, voiced by Thandui Newton. After her mate, King Obasi, ousts him from the boys' club, exiling him to hang with the lady lions. Now, before you start growling, I am not saying that children, boys in particular, don't learn things from their mothers. Moms are just as essential in boys growing and maturing into healthy, well-adjusted young men. But there's no denying the importance of a father or a father figure on a boy's journey towards manhood. Essentially, here, Mufasa, the platonic ideal of virtuous virility, becomes the man lion and ultimately king he is by getting in touch with his low-T female side, away from the toxic patriarchy. Compounding matters is the stark contrast in the images of fatherhood offered by the two movies. Mufasa, warm, wise, strong, and regal, and here Obasi is a lazy, overbearing jerk who bullies his son Taka, teaching him that kings must sometimes rule through deceit. And let's talk about that word king. Mufasa, his very name, means king in Swahili. Yet it turns out he's a bit of a poser, without a drop of royal blood in him. Simba is a king because his father Mufasa was a king. But now we learn that Mufasa becomes a king, well, because he was bigger and braver and defeats the leader of the Outsiders, Kyros, voiced by Mads Mikkelsen, a really cool-looking character. And essentially, Mufasa usurps the crown from the more cowardly Scar, who had a rightful claim. That's quite a different Mufasa than the one I knew and loved. The film does change the whole complexion of the first movie. In rewatching the original, some of the dialogue certainly suggests a juicy backstory between the two brothers, ripe for exploration. But it certainly positioned Mufasa as a king in a line of kings. Even as recent as the 2019 remake, Zazu, King Mufasa's loyal hornbill major domo, references, quote, a headstrong cub that he knew, meaning he had known Mufasa during the lion's childhood, one would assume in the royal court. Whereas here, Mufasa doesn't meet Zazu, voiced by Preston Nyman, until he's a semi-full-grown lion. Even the Disney wiki page references a storybook from 1994, A Tale of Two Brothers, that tells of Mufasa and Taka/Scar being two sons of King Ahadi, the ruler of Pride Rock. Now, that children's book is not considered Disney canon, and yes, the director of the original Lion King, Rob Minkoff, said in a 2017 interview that it was likely the two rivals would not have had the same two parents, but he did surmise they'd be part of the same gene pool, and I haven't been able to find anything suggesting that gene pool would be anything but royal, which makes the film's revisionist take such a head-scratcher and a disappointment. We also learned that Pride Rock itself is a recently formed feature of the savannah, not some hallowed ancient ancestral dwelling place of kings. Worst of all, at one point, Mufasa actually rejects the title of king altogether, proclaiming to his four-legged would-be subjects, "No more kings, we're all one," rejecting what his name literally means. How does that lion mature into James Earl Jones's stately monarch? Look, nothing wrong with animals banding together to oppose evil and build and strengthen community, both very Christian concepts. But what's with all the confusing pivoting away from kingship in a film about a lion king? I suspect, and it's just my opinion, that it's not kings that are the problem, but what kings and queens represent. Tradition, or more precisely, a traditional understanding of the source of a king's authority. St. Thomas Aquinas taught that virtuous kings were the best form of government because they reflected here on earth the kingship of God, the only true and rightful king, the Lion of Judah. Yes, history is littered with bad, terrible, awful kings, even evil ones, who have dishonored the noble role of kings. But good kings or queens mirror, however dimly, divine kingship by embodying compassion, justice, goodness, truth, and concern for their people. In a real way, each Christian reflects that same kingship as we are each baptized as priest, prophet, and king. But our modern mindset, or at least the minds at work in Disney's story development department, can't or won't comprehend outdated things like kings and want to jettison the whole concept of kingship, and more importantly, what, or should I say, who, it points to the dustbin of history. But as the 19th century composer Gustav Mahler once said, tradition is not the worship of ashes, but the preservation of fire. In undercutting the concept of kingship and a rejection of tradition, it strips it of the original film's mythic power. The original scene of a grown Simba ascending Pride Rock as king had an epic and timeless quality that nothing in this film comes close to matching. Oh, and remember that word mercy? Another attribute of a good king, according to St. Thomas Aquinas. Well, at the end of the film, Mufasa has an opportunity to bestow mercy on Scar after a terrible betrayal. But he doesn't. A response that feels harsh and out of character, and one that, again, contrasts the filial compassion intuited in the 1994 and 2019 versions of Mufasa. Perhaps a good counterpoint is Aslan, the great lion and allegorical symbol of Christ from C.S. Lewis's beloved Narnia series, who more than a king is the son of the Emperor over the sea, also called the Emperor beyond the sea. In the first Narnia book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Mr. Beaver says of Aslan, quote, "Course he isn't safe, but he's good. He isn't a tame lion," end quote. Sadly, this film tries to tame Mufasa into a more modern monarch, and in doing so, the film isn't good. My favorite line from the original Lion King is when Mufasa counsels Simba, "Remember who you are." It is a counsel and a command that resonates with me as a Catholic, that I, or any baptized Christian, must always remember we are sons and daughters of a great king. I only wish the filmmakers had remembered who Mufasa was. Until next time, I'm David DiCerto, and this is The Catholic Lens. Don't miss a single episode of The Catholic Lens. Follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and for full videos of our film reviews, subscribe to Castletown Media on YouTube. Stay connected and join the conversation in the comments.